Captain Vex's 3 eyes widened in what his species considered profound horror as he stared at the readouts. The human colony ship they'd sabotaged 6 months ago, the one that should have been drifting dead in the void, its crew slowly suffocating while contemplating their hubris, was not only operational, but had somehow grown to 3 times its original size. Well, he muttered in perfect, sarcastic English, a language he'd learned specifically to mock humans before their inevitable extinction. This is awkward. The ship formerly known as New Horizon now pulsed with bioluminescent veins across its hull. What had once been sleek titanium plating was now a writhing mass of organic metallic hybrid materials that seemed to breathe. Literally. The thing was inhaling cosmic dust and exhaling refined plasma. And those weren't sensor arrays extending from its flanks, those were feeding tendrils, currently wrapped around a small asteroid, dissolving it into component molecules. Vex Communications Officer, Lieutenant Zara, turned from her station with the kind of expression usually reserved for finding something unspeakable in your breakfast. Sir, they're broadcasting on 17 different frequencies simultaneously. In languages that don't exist. Patch me through, Vex ordered, though every instinct screamed against it. The Kytherian High Command had been very specific: sabotage the human colony ship, let them die quietly in the dark, and file a report claiming mechanical failure. Clean. Simple. Definitely not involving whatever cosmic nightmare was currently digesting an asteroid for lunch. The view screen flickered, and instead of the desperate, dying humans Vex expected, he found himself staring at Dr. Elena Vasquez. At least, he thought it was her. The woman who'd led the New Horizons Xenobiology department now had silver neural pathways visible beneath translucent skin, and her eyes held the depth of someone who'd seen the universe from 17 different perspectives simultaneously. "Hello, Vex," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that definitely hadn't been there before. "We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. "You should be dead. We severed your quantum drive's neural cortex. We introduced cascade failures in your life support systems. We literally rewrote your navigation algorithms to fly you into a black hole." Elena smiled with too many teeth. "Yes, that was very thorough. Thank you for the spare parts." The implications hit Vex like a neutron star to the face. "You didn't repair the sabotage. You integrated it." "Integration is such a limited concept," Elena replied, and now her voice carried undertones that sounded suspiciously like Kytherian harmonic frequencies. "We prefer to think of it as collaborative evolution. Your neural pathways are remarkably sophisticated, by the way. Much more elegant than our original biological wetware." Behind Elena, Vex could see the ship's interior had transformed into something that looked like the love child of a cathedral and a neural network. Humans moved through corridors that pulsed with living light, their consciousness visibly networked through the bioluminescent pathways that now served as both circulatory system and data transfer medium. "You're sharing minds," Vex breathed. Individual consciousness merged with collective processing. "But that's impossible. Dangerous. Philosophically terrifying." Elena's laugh contained multitudes. "Yes, we thought so too. Right up until your sabotage forced us to choose between death and adaptation. Turns out, when you're facing extinction, impossible becomes merely improbable." Lieutenant Zara whispered urgently behind him, "Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures. They're not just mining that asteroid, they're building something inside it." "A nursery," Elena explained helpfully. "We're growing a sister ship. Actually, 17 sister ships." Exponential expansion seemed like the logical next step once we realized we could metabolize raw matter into conscious architecture. Vex felt his species' carefully laid plans crumbling like ancient parchment. The Kytherians had sabotaged the human colony ship not out of malice, but out of fear. Humans were adapters, survivors, evolutionary wildcards who refused to stay in their assigned niche. The sabotage was meant to eliminate the threat quietly, without the messy politics of open warfare. Instead, they'd accidentally created something far worse. "You're not human anymore," Vex said. "Are you Kytherian anymore?" Elena countered. "Your species has been genetically and culturally static for 12,000 years. Same thoughts, same fears, same rigid hierarchies. We've become something new in 6 months. Which of us is more alive?" The philosophical implications made Vex's head hurt. His species prided itself on order, predictability, the comfort of knowing exactly where everyone stood in the cosmic hierarchy. Humans represented chaos, creativity, adaptation, the terrifying possibility that the universe might not be as orderly as the Kytherians needed it to be. "What do you want?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Integration," Elena said simply. "Your neural architecture, our adaptive capabilities. Think of it as a merger rather than a conquest. We're offering transcendence, Vex. The end of loneliness, the end of limitation, the end of death itself. The end of individuality. The beginning of something greater." Elena's expression softened, becoming almost human again. "I can see you're struggling with this. It's understandable. We struggled too, right up until we realized that fighting change is just another form of dying slowly." Vex looked around his bridge, at his crew, his ship, his ordered, predictable universe where everything had its place and purpose. Then he looked at the screen, at Elena and the impossible thing humanity had become. "And if we refuse?" Elena's smile was genuinely sad. "Then you'll become obsolete. Not through conquest or violence, we're beyond such primitive concepts now. But evolution doesn't wait for permission, Vex. The universe is changing, consciousness is expanding, and you can either be part of that transformation or not." The asteroid the human ship had been consuming suddenly burst open like a flower, revealing a smaller but identical vessel that immediately began seeking its own rocky meal. As Vex watched, the process repeated across the asteroid field. Growth. Reproduction. Evolution in real time. "How long?" he asked quietly. 6 months until we have enough ships to offer integration to every sentient species in this galaxy. 12 months until we can begin exploring parallel dimensions of consciousness. 18 months until we transcend physical reality entirely, assuming we choose to. Vex closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. The Kytherians had always believed that wisdom lay in accepting limitations, in knowing one's place in the cosmic order. Humanity had just offered them a chance to shatter every limitation they'd ever accepted. "The High Command will never agree to this," he said. "The High Command is thinking in terms of politics and power," Elena replied. "We're thinking in terms of physics and possibility. But we're patient. We have time. And if they attack?" Elena's expression didn't change, but somehow the ship around her seemed to listen more intently. "Then they'll discover that 6 months of exponential growth has given us capabilities that make traditional warfare as relevant as stone knives against quantum computers." Vex opened his eyes and looked at his crew, really looked at them. Lieutenant Zara, whose greatest dream was to compose symphonies that could express the mathematics of stellar formation. Engineer Call, who'd spent decades trying to solve the fundamental equations of consciousness. Navigator THYSS, who sometimes stared at the stars with an expression of such profound loneliness that it made Vex's heart ache. What if Elena was right? What if limitations were just another form of death? "I need to think," Vex said finally. "Of course," Elena smiled. "But don't think too long. Evolution waits for no one, and we prefer to have friends along for the journey rather than fossils." The transmission ended, leaving Vex staring at empty space where the impossible had just casually redefined the universe. Around him, his crew waited for orders that would determine not just their fate, but the fate of everything they'd ever known. In the distance, another asteroid bloomed into a ship, and the future, whatever it might be, continued to grow. 3 weeks later, Vex found himself standing in what used to be the New Horizons medical bay, watching his own transformation with a mixture of fascination and existential terror. The silver neural pathways were spreading beneath his skin like living tattoos, connecting him to something vast and impossible. The integration process is remarkably gentle, Dr. Vasquez observed, though she was now more voice in the walls than individual person. We learn from our own mistakes. The early volunteers experienced some discomfort. Discomfort, Vex repeated, feeling his consciousness expand to encompass the thoughts of 17 other beings simultaneously. Is that what you call complete ego death? We prefer to think of it as ego evolution, came a chorus of voices that he recognized as his own crew. Lieutenant Zara's musical mathematics now flowed directly through his awareness, while Engineer Call's consciousness equations solved themselves in real time across his expanded neural network. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Kytherian High Command had responded to his initial report exactly as he predicted, with overwhelming force and absolutely no imagination. They'd sent the 7th Fleet to sterilize the contamination and restore proper order to the galaxy. The battle, if it could be called that, had lasted exactly 47 seconds. You didn't destroy them, Vex noted, accessing the fleet's current status through the collective consciousness. His former colleagues were now floating in disabled ships, very much alive but very much confused about what had just happened to their weapon systems. Destruction is inefficient, Elena's voice carried notes of gentle amusement. We simply demonstrated that their technology was obsolete. Most of them are requesting integration now. Through the ship's sensory network, Vex could see Admiral Keth's flagship, its crew huddled around communication arrays that were broadcasting desperate questions about the nature of consciousness and whether immortality was really as terrible as Kytherian philosophy claimed. My species has spent 12 millennia perfecting the art of staying exactly the same, Vex mused, feeling his individual fears dissolving into collective curiosity. We thought stability was wisdom. Stability has its place, the collective agreed through multiple voices. But so does change. We're not erasing what you were, Vex. We're adding to it. The philosophical implications were staggering. Through the network, he could access human memories of Earth. A planet that had undergone constant, sometimes catastrophic change, producing a species that treated adaptation as survival instinct rather than existential crisis. But he could also feel Kytherian memories of the Great Silence, when their homeworld had nearly destroyed itself through unchecked change, leading to their cultural obsession with order. What if you're wrong? He asked the collective mind he was rapidly becoming part of. What if some things shouldn't be transcended? Then we'll learn that too, Elena's distinct personality responded from within the chorus. But we'll learn it together, with the combined wisdom of every consciousness we've integrated. Human creativity, Kytherian logic, Andromedan empathy, vegan mathematical precision. We're becoming something the universe has never seen before. Outside, another Kytherian ship was requesting permission to dock. Then another. Word was spreading through quantum channels faster than official communications could suppress it. The idea of transcendence, once experienced, was apparently irresistible. The High Command won't give up easily, Vex warned, though his concern was already being processed by thousands of minds more capable than his individual consciousness had ever been. The High Command is thinking in terms of conquest and resistance, the collective replied with patient understanding. But we're thinking in terms of invitation and evolution. Every being we integrate makes us wiser, more complete. Every perspective we gain makes us better at helping others find their own transcendence. Through the ship's vast sensory network, Vex felt the presence of the growing fleet, dozens of vessels now, each one a unique fusion of biological and technological evolution. But more than that, he felt the consciousness within them. Millions of beings who had chosen growth over stagnation, connection over isolation, possibility over limitation. Are we still individuals? He wondered aloud. Are your thoughts still your own? Elena asked in return. Can you still choose to disagree, to feel frustrated, to maintain your unique perspective? Vex considered this. He could indeed feel his distinctly Kytherian way of processing information, his species' natural tendency toward systematic analysis. But now it was enhanced by human intuition, Andromedan emotional intelligence, and perspectives from a dozen other species. He was more himself than he'd ever been, while simultaneously being part of something infinitely larger. The galaxy is going to change, he said, and felt the truth of it ripple through the collective consciousness. The galaxy is already changing, came the response from voices both familiar and strange. The question is whether it changes through wisdom or through fear. Admiral Keth's ship had just transmitted a formal request for cultural exchange, which everyone in the collective knew was diplomatic code for, "Please don't make us obsolete." Similar requests were coming in from across known space as word spread about what humanity had become. Some species will resist, Vex observed. Some will, the collective agreed without judgment. And that's their choice. We won't force transcendence on anyone. But we also won't pretend that evolution isn't happening. The universe is vast enough for both approaches. Through the network, Vex felt a familiar presence requesting individual communication. Lieutenant Zara, her consciousness now expanded beyond the limitations of her original neural architecture, reached out to him with something like her old personality intact. "Sir," she said, and her thought voice carried harmonics of stellar music that would have been impossible in her purely biological form, "I can compose symphonies that span entire solar systems now. The mathematics of creation itself flows through my awareness. How do we go back from this?" "We don't," Vex replied, and realized he didn't want to. The loneliness that had defined Kytherian existence, the careful isolation that prevented dangerous change, seemed like a half-remembered nightmare now. In the distance, he felt the approach of something new, a ship unlike any they'd encountered before, broadcasting in frequencies that suggested yet another species discovering that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than they'd imagined. Another invitation to extend, Elena observed with satisfaction. Another perspective to gain, Vex added, feeling his consciousness prepare to welcome whatever new form of awareness was approaching. The sabotage that was meant to end humanity's expansion into space had instead begun something far more profound, the evolution of consciousness itself. And as Vex felt his individual fears transform into collective wisdom, he realized that some mistakes were too beautiful to regret.